Okay, welcome tonight to the fifth part of First Book of Samuel. So we have only one more part. There will be 6 parts total of the whole book of Samuel. And today we'll be doing chapters 22 through 26. I hope everybody read. Okay, so let's start in chapter 22. And it says, because remember that last time we had the issue of, well, not we, David had the issue with Saul, that Saul was wanting to kill him. Everywhere that he looked around, he was always carrying his spear. And today, as I was reading these chapters, I decided that the spirit that the Lord had put upon him was really a spirit of paranoia. He probably was borderline schizophrenic, which we know that many mental issues today are related to spiritual issues. Okay, so most likely he had a schizophrenic paranoia type of, today that would be the diagnosis, okay, clinically. So let's go to chapter 22, and it says, so David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So he's escaping, running away from, remember that he went to the king of Gath, which was from where Goliath was. And he acted that he was also Looney Tunes. He was acting like he was crazy, and so that way they wouldn't hurt him. But he escaped from there, and it says he went to the cave of Adullam, and when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, they went down there to him. So remember, his father is Jesse. So his father and his brothers and family came down to see him there. Verse 2, everyone who was in distress and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Or in other words, he became like a leader. Now, why did these people, all who were in distress and all that were in debt and all that were discontented, came to him? Because they knew who he was, and so they thought that maybe by aligning with him, their fate would change, that circumstances would change. So, and sometimes that's the way I feel, but anyway. And it says, now there were about 400 men with him. So out of all those people, around 400 men gathered with him. And verse 3 says, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. Then he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now, why the king of Moab? Remember that I think his great-grandmother was Ruth, and Ruth was a Moabite. So there was a relationship between the Moabites and David at this time because of Ruth. So he felt confident to leave his parents there with the king of Moab until it says he came out of the stronghold. Verse 5, the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Heret. Then Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered. Now Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. So he never lets go of that spear. Do you think he's paranoid? Saul said to his servants who stood around him, hear now, O Benjamites, will the son of Jesse also give to all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? In other words, he's enticing them to go with him against David, because as king, he's the one that can give them rewards like lands and positions. So he's telling them, if you guys come with me and help me find David, you will be rewarded with these things. Okay? Verse 8. For all of you have conspired against me, so that there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you who is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush as it is this day. So not only is he paranoid about David, he's paranoid about his own son. That he says that his son is making covenant with David together to ambush him and go against him. And that everybody else is conspiring. I mean, this is a classic paranoia. Verse 9, and it says, then Doeg the Edomite. Remember who's Edomite? Edomite is Esau is from the family of Esau, who's the brother of Jacob. And Esau always wanted to get rid of Jacob and all his descendants. So an Edomite is an enemy. Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing by the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. He inquired of Yahweh for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Remember when David was asking for provisions, he went into the priest, and they gave him the showbread that had been taken off the table, plus the sword of Goliath. And it says in verse 11, Then the king sent someone to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's household, the priests who were in Nob, and all of them came to the king. Saul said, Listen now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here I am, my lord. Saul then said to him, Why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he would rise up against me by lying in ambush as it is this day? So now he's accusing the poor priest of conspiring with David. Verse 14, Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, even the king's son-in-law, who is captain over your guard and is honored in your house? Do you think Saul wanted to hear that? No. Verse 15, Did I just begin to inquire of God for him today? Far be it from me. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any of the household of my father, for your servant knows nothing at all of this whole affair. But the king said, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's household. Now Saul, as king, had the right to say that. Why? Because as king, the priesthood had to be loyal and faithful to him, because he's the king. But what happens, it says, And the king said to the guards who were attending him, Turn around and put the priest of Yahweh to death, because their hand also was David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it to me. But the servants of the king were not willing to put forth their hands to attack the priest of Yahweh. So his own servants are not following his order. First of all, you have to remember that even though he's sitting as king, he's already been put away as king in the sense of his office has been given already to David. And so his servants, first of all, they fear Yahweh. Why are we going to kill these people innocently? Number two, you really, really are not the king. And if they helped David, they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, being faithful to David, who's the real king. Verse 18, Then the king said to Doeg, You turn around and attack the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned around and attacked the priest, and he killed that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Why? Because he's an Edomite. He could care less about the priesthood. He could care less about David. And I'm sure he's looking for a reward on behalf of King Saul. Verse 19, and not only did he kill those priests there, he says, And he struck Nob, the city of the priests, with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and infants, also oxen, donkeys, and sheep he struck with the edge of the sword. In other words, he committed a great slaughter of innocent people, all because of the paranoia of King Saul. Now, do you think these are things that Yahweh is looking upon him with good eyes? Verse 20, But one son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priest of Yahweh. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have brought about the death of every person in your father's household. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, for you are safe with me. So David understands, in a way he feels guilty of what had happened. Chapter 23. Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are plundering the threshing floors. Now remember that the threshing floors, if they're plundering the threshing floors, That means that they already have harvested all the grain. They're sifting the grain in the threshing floor, so that means all the produce for the people in that season is right there. So if the Philistines are fighting against them, what are they doing? Getting rid of the food. Because if they have no food, they know they can go after them more easily. So David inquired of Yahweh, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? And Yahweh said to David, go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah. But David's men said to him, behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the ranks of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord once more, and Yahweh answered him and said, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, and he led away their livestock and struck them with a great slaughter. Thus David delivered the inhabitants of Keilah. Now it came about when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David at Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. When it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. So he thinks that God is in his favor by letting Saul know where David is. Verse 8, so Saul summoned all the people for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. Now David knew that Saul was plotting evil against him, so he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. Now remember that the ephod, they're using the ephod because the ark still at this point is under control of the Philistines. Okay, even though it doesn't say here, but if you go back and forth to what you're reading, the ark is still in the hands of the Philistines. Verse 10, then David said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, your servant has heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down just as your servant has heard? O Yahweh, God of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. And Yahweh said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And Yahweh said, they will surrender you. So isn't it interesting that he's asking guidance from the Lord all the time before he does anything, contrary to Saul, who just did and followed what the people said. Verse 13, then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit. David stayed in the wilderness in the strongholds and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. Verse 15. Now David became aware that Saul had come out to seek his life while David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh and encouraged him in God. Remember that that Jonathan and David are kin spirits, and they always have God in mind, and before they do anything, they trust the Lord to do whatever they need to do. Verse 17, thus he said to him, do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you, and Saul my father knows that also. So the two of them made a covenant before Yahweh, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. So again, when it says they made a covenant, what they really do are renewing the first covenant they made. Because he knows you are going to be king and I'm going to be with you. In other words, I am loyal and faithful to you. You're my king, not my father. You are really my king. And so this was the covenant. Remember that when they speak to each other of love, it's a legal term of covenant, which means loyalty and faithfulness. Verse 19, then the Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is David not hiding with us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the south of Yeshimon? Now then, O king, come down according to all the desire of your soul to do so, and our part shall be to surrender him into the king's hand. So these guys think, okay, by giving up David, they're probably seeking a reward from the king. Saul said, may you be blessed of Yahweh, for you have had compassion on me. Go now, make more sure, and investigate and see his place where his haunt is, And who has seen him there? For I am told that he is very cunning. So look and learn about all the hiding places where he hides himself, and return to me with certainty, and I will go with you. And if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. How persistent he is in wanting to kill David. Verse 24. Then they arose and went to live before Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah to the south of Jeshimon. When Saul and his men went to seek him, they told David, and he came down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were surrounding David and his men to seize them. But a messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land." So Saul returned from pursuing David and went to meet the Philistines. Therefore they called that place the Rock of Escape. David went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-Gedi. So while Saul is trying to get David, here the Philistines are attacking his land, and so now he has to forget about David to go fight the Philistines. So that's a detour. Do you think that was from God? Absolutely. Chapter 24. Now when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, saying, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. 3,000 men against David and his 600. Do you think that's fair? Verse 3, he came to the sheepfolds on the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which Yahweh said to you, Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." So imagine this picture. Here's this cave that has a lot of recesses. So they're hiding. David's hiding there with his men from Saul. And it so happens that Saul goes in there to relieve himself. I don't know, number one, number two, I don't know, whatever it is. Uh-huh.
It says in here that he went in to cover his feet.
It's the same thing. It's an idiom for saying he needed to relieve himself. Okay. Then David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. Now you have to remember that the edges of robes, usually they either had tzitziot, and the hem of a robe usually contain special documents. So cutting the robe up was a sign of shame. Okay, so he was shaming him. And it came about, verse 5, it came about afterward that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. So he said to his men, "Far be it from me because of Yahweh that I should do this thing to my Lord, Yahweh's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is Yahweh's anointed." So imagine the integrity, the honor that David has, that in spite of all that Saul is doing against him, now he feels guilty because he cut the hem of part of the robe of Saul. And he says, "I can't do this to the anointed of Yahweh," because even though Yahweh had taken already his spirit from Saul, and even though Saul already no longer was king in the eyes of Yahweh, he still had the anointing oil upon him. Remember the anointing oil we talked about in the last Torah portion, the special holy anointing oil that was used for the priests, but it was also used for the kings. So, that's a holy anointing oil that you just don't put on anybody. That means that that person has been separated by Yahweh for whatever function. In this case was to be king, but even though Saul hasn't been the best king, he still has been anointed with the holy anointing oil. Verse 7, David persuaded his men with these words and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. And Saul arose, left the cave, and went on his way. Now afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, saying, "My Lord," can you imagine Saul's face? "My Lord, the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and prostrated himself. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men, saying, Behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen that Yahweh had given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is Yahweh's anointed. Now my father, see, indeed, see the edge of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you. Know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands, and I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between you and me, and may Yahweh avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog, a single flea? Yahweh therefore be judge and decide between you and me, and may he see and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. Wow, what a speech. Okay? He had the opportunity, but he feared more God than he feared Saul and his men. And not only that, he still is loyal and faithful to Saul, in spite of Saul wanting to kill him. And he understands that he cannot go against the anointed of Yahweh. And when he says a dead dog, a single flea, during this time in this culture, a dog was seen as something unclean and seen as something like the worst thing that someone could be. To call somebody a dog was like saying you're worthless. It's not like now that dogs for us are almost like part of the family, you know, a man's best friend. During that time, the dog was not man's best friend. And a single flea, I mean, he's putting himself the lowest level in the eyes of King Saul to let him know that he's not against him, that he's still loyal and faithful to him. Verse 16, when David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, is this your voice, my son David? Now you have to understand that when there's a king and a vassal, and when there's a covenant between the king and the vassal, you treat the king as he were your father, and the king treats you as you were his son. So that's why that vocabulary of my father, my son, that's part of the culture, the understanding between a sovereign king and his vassal. Then Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt wickedly with you. You have declared today that you have done good to me, that Yahweh delivered me into your hand, and yet you did not kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? May Yahweh therefore reward you with good in return for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. So now swear to me by Yahweh that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. Remember the importance of a name. Because he's telling him, if you kill my descendants, then my name cannot continue. Okay? So he's asking for compassion, not to do away with his family, with his descendants. Why? Because it was the cultural thing that when a king came to position, if there were any, I mean, this was more other nations. Once a king came to position, he would kill all the families of the other king that was, I mean, you could only come to position either you captured the king or you killed the king. So they would kill all the family members of that king. Why? So they wouldn't come and oppose the new one. So they wouldn't cause problems to the new king. So basically they slaughtered the whole family. And when you're reading in the New Testament about Herod, remember that Herod was king when Yeshua was born? And Herod was an Edomite. But he had converted to Judaism to find favor within the Roman government. And so eventually he was made king. But he tried to please the Jews doing certain things, but he wasn't really born a Jew. He was from Edom. And because he also was a paranoid, schizophrenic king, no, more than bipolar, not only did he killed many of his wives, and he killed almost all his sons. I think only 3 were left by the time he died. Why? Because he wanted to be the king of the Jews. He himself called himself the king of the Jews because nobody else recognized him as king of the Jews. But he was so paranoid that someone would take his position as king. That's why when he found out that the king of the Jews was born, he slaughtered all those children because he didn't want any competition. So we have the same thing here. So Saul, knowing that that was something that was done culturally, he's asking for compassion from David not to kill off his descendants. Verse 22, David swore to Saul, and Saul went to his home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Verse 25, chapter 25. Then Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together and mourned for him, and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. Now this is not Mount Carmel, this is a different Carmel. And the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Now to have 3,000 sheep at that time, you were really, really rich. You were almost like a Trump. Okay? And it came about while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was intelligent and beautiful. Not only beautiful, but she was intelligent too in appearance. But the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. A Calebite from Caleb. Remember Caleb? So Nabal is a descendant of Caleb. So in a way, they're related with David. They're kind of like way, way, way far cousins or something. Verse 4, that David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servant and to your son David. So what's going on? Because of the time frame, many of the shepherds would take their sheep away from where they lived, and they would take their flock and live there until they were able to come back. And it's also a time of shearing. So remember, if there's some sheep that are being sheared, then you have another flock that has to be pastured. So where they were exactly where David was. So David, remember, he's a shepherd. So the shepherds, while they were there around the same area that he is, he's taking care of them. He's making sure nobody fights them or steals them, or he treats them kindly. So now he knows they belong to Nabal, and as they're going to where they're going, they're asking for provisions. And of course, being sort of related to David, he's expecting that Nabal, not only because they're related, also because they know he's already the anointed king. And because of taking care of his shepherds, he's expecting that Nabal will respond favorably to him. And it says, verse 9, when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? In other words, he's insulting David when he says, there are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. In other words, he's saying to David, you have escaped from your master Saul. So, who are you? No respect for him. Verse 12, so David's young men retraced their way and went back, and they came and told him according to all these words. David said to his men, each of you gird on his sword. So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the field. They were a wall to us both by night and by day. All the time we were with them tending the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. So even his servants understand that Nabal is, they call him a worthless man. So this servant comes to Abigail, who's beautiful and intelligent, because they know they can't talk to the master. This guy's not going to understand what we're trying to tell him. So in verse 18 it says, and Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 measures of roasted grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs. I mean, they were rich to be able to bring this amount of supply, and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I am coming after you. So what does she do? She sends all these gifts before her, so when David sees them, kind of remember like what Jacob did with Esau, his brother, as he's coming, he's sending all these gifts before him to see if he comes down from wanting to go against him. So it says, go on before me, behold, I'm coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Verse 20, it came about as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming down toward her. So she met them. Now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him. So David was already surely that he was going to go against Nabal and kill everybody. Everybody. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the blame, and please let your maidservant speak to you, and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. So she's wise, she honors David, she prostrates herself, recognizing that he's king. She takes the blame for what her husband said and did not do. And not only that, she understands that his name Nabal goes along with the way he was. Because Nabal really means that he's foolish. Now, foolish in this time is really a person that is completely away from God. Okay, that has no interaction with God.
It says, again in 25, let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal.
It doesn't say this in my translation, so I don't know. Verse 26, now therefore, my Lord, as Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, since Yahweh has restrained you from shedding blood, and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal. Now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my Lord to be given to the young men who accompany my Lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for Yahweh will certainly make my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of Yahweh, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with Yahweh your God. But the lives of your enemies he will sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when Yahweh does for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and appoints you ruler over Israel, this will not cause grief or trouble heart to my Lord, both by having shed blood without cause and by my Lord having avenged himself. When Yahweh deals well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. What a speech. In other words, she's saying, if you avenge yourself against my husband and kill everybody, but when you come to be king of Israel, what do you think people are going to remember? Look what he did right before sitting on the throne. He's a murderer. He killed all these innocent people to avenge himself. So she's reasoning, saying, this politically does not suit you to go and do that. So she's honor. Remember, it's about honor. Please remember your honor and make sure that you don't kill nobody and damage your reputation. Verse 32, then David said to Abigail, blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me, and blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as Yahweh, God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, surely there would not have been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one male. So David received from her hand what she had brought him and said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and granted your request. So he changed his mind about killing Nabal because of her, a wise, intelligent, discerning woman. So she goes and pleads for her life and for her husband, who's worthless. But yet she goes and honors David as the way her husband should have done it. Verse 36, then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. Also very wise. Why try to argue with a drunk person? Worthless time. Yeah, verse 37. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him so that he became as a stone. Why? Because when he realized that David was going to come against him and kill him and all that he had, he said, he was serious about this. So he says that he had almost like a stroke. About 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal and he died. He probably had a heart attack. A massive heart attack, and lasted 10 days and died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be Yahweh, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from evil. Yahweh has also returned the evil doing of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent a proposal to Abigail. He don't waste time. To take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. She arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, behold, your maidservant is a maid to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. Humility. Then Abigail quickly arose and rode on a donkey with her 5 maidens who attended her, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. So what's the issue of taking her as his wife? First of all, she's a widow now, but she was so kind to him that now he's going to return the kindness and take care of her. And not only that, also politically, it suits him to do this with Abigail. Verse 43, David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both became his wives. Now, they don't say why he took this other lady as his wife, but most likely it was because of politics. Remember, as he's wandering around everywhere, he's probably meeting other leaders, and so during this time, marriages many times were made as a political strategy. Okay. Verse 44, now Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Galim. So not only is David gaining wives as he's going around, but his wife that was Saul's daughter, Saul gives her away to someone else. Chapter 26. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is not David hiding on the hill of Halilah, which is before Jeshimon? So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having with him 3,000 chosen men of Israel, to search for David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul camped in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon, beside the road, and David was staying in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies, and he knew that Saul was definitely coming. David then arose and came to the place where Saul had camped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the commander of his army, and Saul was lying in the circle of the camp, and the people were camped around him. So Saul is in the middle, and all the rest of the soldiers are around him, keeping guard of him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping inside the circle of the camp with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. Again, his spear, he doesn't let that thing go. And Abner and the people were lying around him. Then Abishai said to David, today God has delivered your enemy into your hand. Now therefore, please let me strike him with the spear to the ground with one stroke, and I will not strike him the second time. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against Yahweh's anointed and be without guilt? David also said, as Yahweh lives, surely Yahweh will strike him, or his day will come that he dies, or he will go down into battle and perish. Yahweh forbid that I should stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. But now please take the spear that is at his head and the jug of water, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's head, and they went away. But no one saw or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a sound sleep from Yahweh had fallen on them. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on the top of the mountain at a distance with a large area between them. You know, he's not stupid either. David called to the people and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, will you not answer, Abner? Then Abner replied, who are you who calls to the king? So David said to Abner, are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your lord the king? For one of the people came to destroy the king your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As Yahweh lives, all of you must surely die, because you did not guard your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the jug of water that was at his head. So what is he saying to Abner? You're the greatest commander of all Israel. The commander of the army of the king of Israel. And yet, here I come, go into the camp, get the spear, get the jug of water, and you didn't even notice. What kind of guard are you? So he's taunting him. He's making fun of him. Verse 17, then Saul recognized David's voice and said, is this your voice, my son David? And David said, it is my voice, my lord the king. He also said, why then is my lord pursuing his servant? For what have I done? Or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore, please let my lord the king listen to the words of his servant. If Yahweh has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it is men, cursed are they before Yahweh, for they have driven me out today, so that I would have no attachment with the inheritance of Yahweh, saying, go serve other gods. Now then, do not let my blood fall to the ground away from the presence of Yahweh. For the king of Israel has come out to search for a single flea, just as one hunts a partridge in the mountains. Now a single flea, you know how tiny a flea is. So basically he's telling Saul, you're wasting your time, because I'm worthless. And besides, as a flea, you can't even find me. So it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will not harm you again, because my life was precious in your sight this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have committed a serious error. David replied, behold the spear of the king. Now let one of the young men come over and take it. Yahweh will repay each man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For Yahweh delivered you into my hand today, but I refuse to stretch out my hand against Yahweh's anointed. Now behold, as your life was highly valued in my sight this day, so may my life be highly valued in the sight of Yahweh, and may he deliver me from all distress. Then Saul said to David, blessed are you, my son David. You will both accomplish much and surely prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. So in summary of all these chapters that we have read, The main theme is honor and shame. The shame of King Saul, for twice David having the chance to kill him, and he didn't, because David fears the Yahweh, because Saul is his anointed. Not only that, he repays with kindness and goodness Abigail as a widow, because her husband was a fool. And even though she took the blame, but she was kind also to David and brought gifts and brought provisions for his men. So, but still David, his integrity, his loyalty, his faithfulness to his king. So those are, I think those were some of the things why David was so dear to Yahweh's heart. His faithfulness, his love, his commitment, his integrity, and how he treated well those that needed to be treated well. Okay, so now we'll go for some questions.